Hello viewers, thank you for joining me. This series has stayed on my mind ever since it lost its pull to Tearmoon Empire, mostly because I'd expected it to do a little better than it did, but I thought it sounded good. So here we are. Raven of the Inner Palace brings us into a world modeled on ancient China, where the emperor rules over a series of palaces, each run by their own royal consort. It's a complicated but fascinating atmosphere. For the most part, they all coexist peacefully, but the palace is rife with its own brand of politics. It's an ongoing competition of sorts, with each consort vying for the emperor's favor, not only to improve the status of their families back home, but also to be the one to have the honor of producing the next heir and becoming the next empress. Our story begins with Gaojun, the young crown prince, overthrowing the past empress and taking his place on the throne, kickstarting a new, slightly kinder age for the kingdom. There are some gaps in this story. A few things I wish had been spelled out just a little more clearly. Gaojun's father is almost never mentioned. We're kind of left to assume he lived long enough to produce an heir, but died before he ever officially took the throne. And the more I think about that, the more I have to wonder how accidental that death might have been. The Empress Dowager proved herself to be a cruel and jealous woman at every opportunity, known for poisoning her rivals. Gaojun himself was sent into exile after his mother's death. We don't see a lot of the Empress Dowager. She mostly just haunts this story from the background after she's overthrown. Presumably she just wanted to stay in power as long as possible. Whether that made her selfish enough to kill her own son, impossible to say. The anime really just glances over that era of the family history. If it feels like I'm spending an excessive amount of time on a character who's only around for, like, half an episode's runtime throughout the whole show, it's because young Emperor Gaojun honestly just isn't quite as interesting as his predecessors. He's very reserved emotionally, but likable enough. Who doesn't like a humble king, right? He understands loneliness and grief given his upbringing, and even before he was sent away, he spent his childhood watching the Empress publicly humiliate his mother any chance she got, so he tends to empathize with the beaten down. His kindness shows through consistently. He was just a little dull sometimes, but he's also only half of this story. Deep within the inner palace, in an isolated household, lives a mysterious woman known as the Raven Consort. Though she holds the consort title, tradition is that the Raven Consort actually never has any contact with the emperor. She's a sorceress of sorts, revered by all, said to be hand-picked by a goddess who also inspires as much fear as she does respect. But while she may intimidate the other members of the palace, it doesn't stop her from having a pretty steady stream of visitors, usually in the dead of night. The Raven Consort is said to be able to find lost items, cast and purify curses, and most often people call upon her to communicate with the dead. The current Raven Consort is a young woman named Shoshua, and this is as good a time as any to mention that I watched this one in English. Raven of the Inner Palace occupies an interesting space in the whole sub versus dub debate. Unlike most anime I've watched, this one doesn't take place in a Japanese setting, or even some kind of vaguely Japanese fantasy world. This is meant to take place in China, so they all, understandably, have Chinese names. To be honest, that was a little daunting for me, going into this one, but then I started up the first episode and I noticed something. Though the subtitles keep the Chinese spellings, the Japanese audio uses Japanese versions of their names. The English dub decided to use the original ones. I really liked this choice. Aside from not liking the disconnect of reading one thing but clearly hearing another, it just felt truer to what this series was trying to be. So I watched this one dubbed, have researched and mimicked to the best of my ability, and if I'm still butchering the pronunciations, that's on me. Gaojun starts shaking up the palace's rules and traditions right away, as our story really begins on a night when he goes to visit Shoshua himself. There are several points I want to make about their dynamic, which makes sense, I guess, as their relationship is the heart of this show. But the first thing I want to talk about actually has more to do with the tone of this series as a whole. Raven of the Inner Palace definitely isn't any kind of traditional detective story, but it does see these two combining their powers to solve a bunch of mysteries within their palace society. Their first case begins with Gaojun wanting her to help a ghost haunting an earring he found. Most of their cases follow this sort of format, where the end goal is to bring peace to the spirit involved and help them move on to the afterlife. This softer approach is my favorite kind of ghost story. I was a huge fan of Ghost Whisperer growing up, and it definitely shaped my tastes. There's still a more sinister element sometimes. Most of these souls are trapped here because they have regrets about their life or met some kind of gruesome end, but each conflict is usually resolved on a peaceful note. It brought a balance to this show, because there was always something darker lying in wait for these two in the greater story. Our two main characters have a complicated relationship. Gaojun doesn't receive a particularly warm welcome the first time they meet, or most of the times he goes to visit her afterwards. He's not your typical arrogant, spoiled royal, so he takes her rudeness pretty well. If anything, it only further piques his interest and starts him down the path of trying to uncover the origins of the Raven Consort, and it's understandable that it would. The other consorts often carry the title of princess and are rulers in their own rights over their respective households, but Shoshua alludes from their very first meeting that it's not just her magic that sets her apart. Her predecessor really impressed upon her the importance of the Raven Consort's isolation. In a way, her very existence is about keeping the balance and bringing peace to this kingdom, because the Raven Consort is actually on equal footing with the Emperor, and nothing has more potential for danger than a very talented sorceress the Emperor has no power over. Of course, even once he discovers this, Gaojun isn't the type to feel the need to prove his dominance as the one true ruler of this kingdom. What he focuses in on is the unfairness of her fate, and whether there's anything he can do to change the ancient rules. But there are a lot of layers to the history of this kingdom. And to Shoshua's background, there's more than one reason she might have been willing to essentially go into hiding, and she and Gaojun uncover that they have some similar childhood struggles, things that shaped them to be who they are today, things that slowly tear down all the walls she's tried to put up between them. As far as characters go, Gaojun and Shoshua complement each other really nicely. If this anime had had more than 13 episodes to work with, I'm sure they would have dived into a romance between them. There were hints of it already from the very beginning, but I really liked how that element was handled. They go slow with it. The little hints they drop never feel too in-your-face or over-dramatic. There's very much a focus on needing to build up trust and a relationship as friends first, and I loved that. It's a choice I wish more writers would make, even if it comes at the expense of some of the drama. It's kind of a subtler element, but Shoshua's got a lot of growing to do as an individual before I could really picture her in a relationship. With each mystery they tackle, she puts herself out there a little more, building bonds with some of the other members of the palace. Gaojun slowly manages to convince her that maybe she doesn't have to be alone. I thought this series looked good from the outside, but I was honestly kind of surprised by just how much I enjoyed it. There was a lot about this one that was really right up my alley. Their take on the ghost element, the focus on friendship over romance, and seeing Shoshua slowly start to open up. It's one of those shows where I was sad when it was over, but not because it felt incomplete. I'm sure if they'd had more time, they could have gone on to explore a romance between these two, but that didn't really feel necessary to this story's success. All the major conflicts are addressed by the end. It's just that I would have been happy to continue on watching these characters solve mysteries and soothe the various ills of the palace almost indefinitely. I got really sucked into this world. Personally, I think "There was nothing wrong with this ending, I just didn't want it to end," is some of the highest praise a series can receive. So I definitely recommend checking this one out if you skipped it. Thank you for watching.